There is a battle of civilizations going on right in the United States of America, and I'll explain why I say that in a second. But I say it in the context of a recent rash of holiday protests that have happened across the country, where protesters have stood in front of groups of cars blocking them from going to the airport, where they have stood at nativity scenes in major cities like New York City, and they have thrown blood on the nativity scenes, and they have put a hijab over Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. Where protesters have also stood in front of the World Trade Center, the modern-day World Trade Center, and they have sought to block that off. And they've done so many different things to disrupt, to vandalize, and to act just like antisocial, anti-civilizational wretches in the name of freedom. A society that is based on freedom, which I support, and based on pluralism, which I also support, must take a strong stance against those who would seek to abuse those concepts and principles to do things that are clearly against freedom and against pluralism in the name of those two ideas. Because that society will recognize that those people are not using those concepts correctly. A lot of people, when I immediately jump to the idea that these protesters who are doing this crazy stuff are all simply products of dark money flowing from George Soros' chambers into the streets of America, and that is why all this is happening. Many people simply want to say, also, they don't say that, they want to say that these people are simply useful idiots for the bigger institutional agenda the left has for this country. I think both of those approaches, while they have some hint of truth to them, are so grossly simplistic, and they actually miss the root cause of this behavior. Ideas precede accomplishment. Ideas precede action. And a society, or rather even a conservative movement, that refuses to identify the role that ideas have in producing certain kinds of behavior is not a movement that can conserve anything, because their view is entirely contingent on who has the most money, who has the most power, who is the biggest boogeyman, and who is the most nefarious. When you see these protesters in the street doing this crazy stuff, being profane in their actions, being censorious in their motives, being antisocial in their desires, you should not think useful idiots. Because evidently, the people that are doing this are being talked about by you and me. They're getting press and they're having an impact. They must not be as stupid as people think they are. Dumb and dull people, as Thomas Sowell once mentioned, the damage they can do is very limited. But people that actually understand what they're doing and what they want in the world, those are the most dangerous people in the world. We tend to have this romantic idea of intelligent society, which, by the way, I'm someone who values intelligence very much. But we have this idea of intelligent society that sometimes displaces our emphasis on having good character and our emphasis on having a sound mind in other respects. You can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't know how to empathize with a human being in their own struggle, then you're not really fulfilling the fullness of your humanity. Think on that for a second. So this is bigger than just a few protesters, as I mentioned before. This is a battle of civilizations. Every single person in this world undertakes their behavior in reference to an idea, whether that be subconsciously or consciously. I'm undertaking this dialogue right now with you guys in between the space of the internet with the idea of hopefully informing you and giving you a different perspective by which to analyze political and social events. Now, even if I was just talking on the street to some random person with no intention in mind to do that, that's still the idea. The idea of communication influences my actions. So whenever we try to dismiss the role of philosophy or ideas when it comes to identifying the source of certain behaviors and then addressing those behaviors by attacking that source, we are missing the full picture and we have a very limited view of what's actually going on. The goals of these protesters are clear and unambiguous. Their goals are very simple. They seek to fight for their version of justice in a manner that violates the moral norms for both society and in particular for both American society. We can't exist in this world without having some kind of moral norms in our society. Civilization actually exists because there are certain norms that try to guide conduct and behavior. Not all norms, obviously, are made equal. Some norms are worse than others. And this is one of the reasons why I never will say that tradition is the end-all, be-all of social consideration. This is what Edmund Burke thought. Edmund Burke was a prominent philosopher who influenced traditionalist conservatives, and his emphasis was not on really principles or anything like that. His emphasis was on the traditions of a particular country and keeping those intact. And it was through that Burke justified certain kinds of tyrannies, right? It's fine to have traditions, but it's better to have traditions that are influenced by sound principles. And it's even better to have sound principles that are not influenced by traditions, but are certified by a reasonable assessment of their merit and value to human flourishing, their merit and value to living well in reality, and their merit and value to civilization. And so these norms are essential to the formation of America. The norms that America were formed on the basis of, I'll call these norms of the New World. These are norms that put a spiritual value, or rather, recognized a spiritual value in the heart of the individual. These are norms that recognize, most importantly, the importance of consent to good governance. These are norms that recognize, most importantly, the value of reason to a good society and to also truth-seeking. And then, of course, implicit in that is a recognition of the value of truth to a society. These are norms which were unique. Freedom is a young idea in the history of the world. Look at all these civilizations in the old world. They were ruled by status. They were ruled by lineage, whether that be royal lineage or some other kind of lineage. They were ruled by all kind of things that really have nothing to do with sound government and everything to do with the blind perpetuation of traditions that limited the scope of human potential for so long. And so America comes along and it brings this radically different idea that individuals can be self-directing and self-guiding, and it enshrines that idea into political order. But the left, by virtue of where it stands, philosophically, is opposed to the New World. How can I say this? Well, I won't go through a whole history of leftism, but if we examine the history of leftism in America, and we go back to the progressive era, and we analyze some of the things that happened during the progressive era, we could easily see this hatred of the New World system that values the individual, that values reason, that values consent, and that values all this kind of thing. You can see through, for example, the progressive education system, which saw pupils, kids, as tools and robots to be geared towards a certain kind of social consciousness, in the word of Edward Cubberley, who was a massive educational reformer in America. He's the reason why we actually have public school administration. And, of course, John Dewey, who basically is the grandfather of the current education system. And you see this philosophy manifest. You see a certain mentality towards economic relationships. If man cannot be free in his economic relationships, he cannot be free at all. Because man's economic relationships are the spiritual continuation of his desires in interaction with other people. So if you limit those, you limit my ability to act in society, because if I can't interact with other people on the terms that we set forth, I don't really know society beyond the terms set for me by a ruler. In that sense, I am living out someone else's desires, not my own. And so progressives come with all these ideas and they cloak it in the language of justice and equity and equality. And that references a broader idea of egalitarianism, that we can establish this kind of utopia upon the world, even if that is alien to reality. Now, Christian, what does this have to do with the protesters who are being jerks and disrupting travel for holidays and just doing blatantly antisocial things? Well, I'll tell you. These protests are a microcosm of the leftist tendency to emphasize and latch onto revolutionary sentiments to provoke social change. This is what we call social engineering. In a society where your view of society is based on not just oppressor or oppressed, which is the common talking point people like to use. That's the new left. That's like the post-1960s left. when it's based instead on status and class distinctions and group progression. Revolution becomes a necessary tool in your political toolkit. This is why, when you look at leftist politics, a lot of it sounds very revolutionary because that's the intent. The intent is to use the mechanisms of the state to correct society in some way, shape, or form. This is a tendency that is inherently built in to the paradigms of both old leftism, and it has matured in the post-1960s Marcuse-influenced, more woke-type influenced leftism, and it is manifesting in the worst way possible. Leftists like revolution because revolution is a means of obtaining their political goals, and their political goals are antithetical towards the new world. And the new world is quite literally the cradle of freedom and has been the best conditions under which, in recorded history, human civilization has flourished. You don't see the kind of innovation, the kind of education, the kind of enlightenment that we have seen in the past 270 years of America being in existence throughout the rest of the world. Yes, you see innovation and everything, but it's slowed and it's stymied by mediocre concepts, which spoil the minds of men and tie us to fates that were not good for our health ultimately. Yes, there are problems of the new world, but it is a vastly different civilizational outlook than that of the old world. The truth is, these protests reflect, on the level of ideas, old world norms attempting to corrupt New World society. Old world norms that say you can use force and coercion to change a society, when in all reality, force does not change anything. It simply stops and stymies things. Old world norms that say that justice is a collective notion that can and should be pursued, even if that means violating the correct notion of justice, which simply is a safeguard tool to ensure that our contracts, our promises, our rights, and our persons are protected from external influence. This old world norm that you can appraise things on the level of a group is at display here as well. This old world norm that you can desecrate and soil the transcendent in order to provoke a change in the world is also on display here. This is a battle of civilizations. Whether the protesters know it or not, whether you know it or not, this is a battle of civilizations. Karl Popper said in The Paradox of Tolerance that every society will face this era where they are forced to reckon with the intolerant, every tolerant society. And I've talked about this topic in many videos, and I'll link some if you guys want me to. But the most important thing that we can all have when it comes to these intolerant forces, we have to be willing to call it for what it is. We have to be willing to analyze the philosophical implications of their actions. And most important, and this is probably the biggest thing ever, we must be willing to stand up for New World society in a manner that puts Old World society to shame. If we are just going to stay stuck blaming people, calling them idiots, if we are going to be stuck simply saying they're Soros puppets, if we are going to be stuck using the power mindset, which is that everything in the world is controlled by a set of people and we can attribute every single action in the world to either control or freedom, if we're going to be so mediocre in our thinking, our enemies, the enemies of civilization, the enemies of Americanism, they will prevail. Break from your shackles, my friends. Break from your shackles and see what's going on here. American civilization is under assault from people who seek to exploit our goodwill to obtain their temporal aims. Once we realize that, we can fight that. But we can't fight it if we are tuning at windmills and not actually analyzing this for what it is. My friends, as we go forth, we should always remember that there is always an idea behind some level of action. And when we can identify those ideas, we can better understand what to do, how to do it, and most importantly, how this problem arose in the first place. It'll tell us a lot about ourselves. It'll give us a blueprint for a better, more just society and a better, more just political order. My friends, I love you guys so much. like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to our channel. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, everyone.